So the last phyla of upper invertebrates we're going to take a look at are Echinoderms, and that means spiny skin. These are some weird little creatures that don't really fit the evolutionary pathway the way we've been progressing, but they're still fascinating, and we're going to take a look at how they're similar and how they've kind of departed separately from how we were progressing towards vertebrates. So there are numerous characteristics that echinoderms have in common. They typically don't have an anterior or posterior end, and that's typically due to the fact that they're radially symmetrical, and we'll come back to that in just a second. They also lack cephalization, which is one of those ways it seems like we're going back in evolutionary history because they don't have that head. They have an endoskeleton, and that endoskeleton is made of spiny plates, and those spiny plates are made of calcium carbonate. You'll remember calcium carbonate's what made the reef structure of the coral reef. It's also what makes some of the spicules and sponges, and it's also what makes some of the shell in mollusks. The bodies of echinoderms are two-sided. There's the oral side, which is the side that the mouth is located on, and then the other side, the opposite side of that, is the aboral side. And so typically the oral side is ventral and the aboral side is dorsal. They use a water vascular system to move and to secure food, and we'll talk more about that in a few slides. They're radially symmetrical, and typically their spokes occur in multiples of 5, and they're arranged around a central body, just like the spokes of a wheel are arranged. They lack organs that we've seen in other more developed invertebrates, and they also have, they don't have specialized sense organs. Arthropods and mollusks have very highly sensitive, specialized sense organs that we don't see in echinoderms. Again, it's another way it looks like we're going back evolutionarily. They do have great powers of regeneration, and we'll talk more about that, but they usually have separate sexes, and that's again one of those things pushing us forward evolutionarily. So the respiration and circulation that takes place inside of echinoderms takes place through the water vascular system. They circulate the needed materials and they get rid of the waste that they make as a process of metabolism through the water vascular system, which is a fluid that carries out many essential body functions in echinoderms, including respiration, circulation, and movement. It opens to the outside through a sieve-like structure called a metaporite. When it comes to excretion, first of all, if we talk about the digestive waste, they are released as feces through an anus. So again, we have that complete digestive system that includes an anus. However, excretion, we're usually talking about the nitrogen-containing waste. And echinoderms typically produce nitrogen-containing waste in the form of ammonia as part of their cellular digestion, or their metabolism. This waste of ammonia is passed into the surrounding water through a thin-walled tissue that's found in the tube feet, and it can be found in the skin gills. So again, without a kidney, it almost seems as though we're taking a step in the reverse direction evolutionarily. So when it comes to the nervous system, most animals that don't have a head don't have a highly developed nervous system. Well, that's exactly what we see in echinoderms. They don't have cephalization, so they don't have a very well-developed nervous system. They do have a nerve ring, which we've seen in other organisms like roundworms, and it surrounds the mouth. And then there are radial nerves that connect the nerve ring to the body sections, to those spokes. Most echinoderms also have some sensory cells that can detect light, gravity, and chemicals that are released by potential prey, but they're not organized into sensory organs. So they have cells that are working to detect these things and can signal to the radial nerves, and that will signal to the nerve ring, but it's not highly organized like we saw in arthropods and mollusks. So echinoderms move using tube feet, which are structures that are located on their oral surface and they're attached to a radial canal. These tube feet kind of act like suction cups. And so as some suction cups make suction, others release, and it's by this release and suction that they're able to move forward. Each tube foot has a sucker at the end, and muscles will pull the center of the sucker upwards, forming like a cup shape. When this happens, with the muscle pulling on the tube foot, it creates suction on the surface, and that allows the foot to stay sucked. When the muscle relaxes, then the suction is released and the tube foot can move forward. Hundreds of these tube feet acting together create an enormous force, and it allows the echinoderms to appear to be walking, and even allows them to pull open shelled prey. So echinoderms can eat clams because their tube feet help pull the bivalve apart. And I will show you a video clip from YouTube of these tube feet working together. When it comes to reproduction, there are separate sexes. Again, one of those things pushing us forward evolutionarily. They do reproduce sexually, but they use external fertilization, which is pretty much what we've seen so far. In most sea star species, the sexes are separate. The sperm gets produced in the testes and the eggs are produced in the ovaries, and then they secrete their reproductive cells into the water, where hopefully the sperm and egg meet and fertilization can take place. The larvae have bilateral symmetry, which is pretty unique because they're radially symmetrical. Again, this is one of those things that kind of pushes them forward evolutionarily. Radial symmetry we would typically associate with like lower invertebrates, but because they have that bilateral symmetrical larva, that pushes them forward evolutionarily. The larva is able to swim around, and then it will eventually stop at the ocean floor, where it will develop into an adult that has radial symmetry. Okay, so we're going to talk about groups of echinoderms, and there are about 7,000 species of echinoderms, and every single species lives in the water. All right, so the first class is Echinoidea, and these are unique in that they have large solid plates that form a box around their internal organs. Many of them are grazers, or they feast off the dead and decaying matter, but they also eat large quantities of algae. Examples include sea urchin and sand dollars, which there's a picture of both of these on the slide. The sea urchins have a 5-part jaw-like structure that allows them to scrape algae off of the rocks, and then sand dollars typically burrow under layers of sand or mud. Some sea urchins are able to wedge themselves into rock crevices during the day, whereas others defend themselves using their long, sharp spines. Orphioidea. These are common in many parts of the sea, especially on coral reefs. They have slender, flexible arms, and they can scuttle around very quickly to escape predators. They can shed one or more of their arms when being attacked, which is pretty cool because when they shed the arm intentionally, that arm will continue to wriggle and move, and that'll distract the predator while the rest of the body escapes. Brittle stars are able to filter feed and feed off of dead and decaying matter, that detritus, that allows them to hide in the day and wander around in the dark. Examples include brittle stars, which is found in the picture on the right, and basket stars, which is the picture on the left. Holothuriida. These are some sea cucumbers that feed off of detritus, and they move along the ocean floor while sucking up organic matter and the remains of other animals and plants that are there. Herds of them travel together. You'll see as many as hundreds of thousands of them together roaming across the sea, and this is typically sea cucumbers. Asteroidea. So these move by creeping slowly across the ocean floor. Most of them are carnivorous, and they tend to prey on mollusks. So if its main food source is mollusks, which is an upper invertebrate, that suggests evolutionarily that they must have come after mollusks were present. So this is part of why we put them in the classification of upper invertebrates. So they tend to eat clams and mussels. Once the prey shell is open, the sea star pushes its stomach out through its mouth, pours out digestive enzyme, digests the mollusks in its own shell, and then the sea star will wrap its stomach around the partially digested prey and pull it into its mouth. They also have really incredible abilities to repair themselves when they're damaged. As long as part of that central nerve ring is present, it will be able to grow into a new animal. So if one of the arms is ripped off, but a piece of that central nerve ring is there, that one single arm will be able to regenerate a whole new sea star, plus the one that broke off will be able to where it still has 4 other spokes, it'll still be able to regrow the one that broke off. These are typically your sea stars and your starfish. Rhinoidea. These are your filter feeders. They have long, feathery arms, and they make up the oldest class of echinoderms. These are commonly found in tropical waters today, and we have a rich fossil record showing that they were distributed widely throughout the ancient seas. Many modern feather stars live in coral reefs where they perch on top of rocks and use their tube feet to catch floating plankton. There's also sea lilies, which use their tube feet along their arms to capture floating plankton as well. So what you have here is on the left you have a sea lily, and on the right you have a sea fan, and you can see that they kind of resemble what we've named them. So the sea lily kind of looks like a flower, and the sea fan kind of looks like one of those fans that you would use to fan yourself on a hot day. So echinoderms have a major role to play in the ocean. A sudden rise or fall in the number of echinoderms can typically cause major changes in populations of other marine organisms. For instance, sea urchins help control the distribution of algae, and so if sea urchin populations decrease, then the rise of algae increases, and as that algae increases, it can cause as the algae increases, it's not that big a deal. It's when the algae starts to die, and when it dies, it starts using up some of that dissolved oxygen, which can kill the fish that live in the water. So having sea urchins there to regulate the quantity of algae is going to be critical. Also, sea stars are important predators. They help keep a number of other organisms in control, like clams and corals. If they grow out of control, then other populations will suffer because of their presence. So they play a big role in maintaining that food web being kept in check. There is one echinoderm that I want to bring to your attention. It's a major threat to coral reefs. It's a sea star, but it's called the crown of thorns. It's an echinoderm that's named for a long row of poisonous spines that are located along its arms. It feeds exclusively on coral. It's found in the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, which is the largest reef system in the world. And this organism is destroying large portions of that Great Barrier Reef. So you need to find something that either eats it or kills it. Otherwise, we have yet another threat to coral reef other than coral bleaching.